Hey, are you a poet and you know it? Well, our next guest is a poet and he knows it. And he's been going around sharing his poetry, which is why we wanted him here sharing with us. My name is Vin Dacquino. His name is Vincent Bell. Vincent,
Good to see you.
good to see you. Like your work, and we're going to share it with this audience today. Who is Vincent Bell?
He's a complicated character. He's had a lot of different roles in life. Let me start with the poet.
Okay.
I've been writing poetry since I was in high school,
Wow, that's a good
which
thing.
goes back to the previous century in the early 60s. And I had wanted to be a professional writer after I graduated from college, but I got sidetracked into business. And I kept writing poetry while I was working in the financial
That's a good
side
thing. I know
of a
that
very
feeling.
large business, and said to myself, when I retire, I'm going to write full time. And I've been lucky enough to actually be able to achieve that goal. And it's been incredibly exciting because I'm starting to get traction. I'm starting to be successful as a poet. As a matter of fact, so far this year I've had 15 poems published,
Wow,
which
that's good.
is a lot in,
Yeah,
in
it
the
is.
crazy world of poetry.
Yes, it is. Now, you were a teenage poet.
Yeah,
What does a teenage poet write about?
girls.
Oh, that makes sense.
The same thing teenage boys do about everything else.
Yeah, I hear you.
I wrote poetry, which was not very good, but it kind of gave me a position
Yeah,
in the high school I
yeah.
went to. I grew up in Manhattan, and I went to a very arty type school, and I was also a painter using oil painting.
Wow.
I wanted to be an
You
abstract.
still paint?
Not so much anymore, but up until the last couple of years, I have been
wow.
painting a lot.
Wow.
And I went to college at NYU and studied English and did very well, and ended up working in business. I worked, the last place was, I was 13 years at a large international law firm, managing their operations in their New York City office.
Wow.
And I kept saying to my wife, you know, when I retire, I'm
Yeah.
really going to do this.
And poetry was your release.
Yeah, but to me, poetry is just another type of communication.
Yeah.
I mean, as when we're kids and they grow up,
But it has an emotional aspect.
but all communication does. Poetry is kind of like a large fishing net, and it captures a lot of emotions, a lot of images, but it's not really any different. We teach kids how to talk, how to communicate. We teach them how to write in school, but we don't teach people how to write poetry,
Is there
which is
a when
unfortunate.
and where for your poetry?
What do you mean?
When do you write? When the spirit moves you?
Oh, no, I tend to be very disciplined about it. I try and write 2 to 3 hours a day.
Really? At a set time?
I try and do it as early in the day as possible, but
Wow.
sometimes I don't get to it until around the middle of the day. But I'm very disciplined about it. I try and work 7 days a week.
And do you do time's up?
No, it basically
How
has
you
to
feel,
do with,
yeah.
with how the
When the
poetry
piece
is
is
working.
done.
And my wife still has a real job. So
Oh,
when she
so-
gets home from work during the day, she said, "How's your day?" And my answer is completely predicated on how my writing went that day.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good. There's so many people who are wonderful writers, but they're not as dedicated and committed to their writing.
I approach it like it's my job now.
Yeah.
You know, I go to work as a writer every day, and I've always been very productive. I've been very lucky in that I always have lots of things flying around in my head that I
Yeah.
want to write about. I don't have writer's block. A lot of people I know who are writers are always talking about, what do you do, Vincent, in order to generate so much material? And my problem literally is stopping writing.
Yeah. Oh, I hear you. When I was writing, yeah, it was interesting to hear you say that writing for you was incorporated into your workday. I did the same thing. I was teaching school, but then I'd come home and write and I'd be in the middle of a novel, and you don't just say, okay, time's up.
You can't turn it off.
No, you can't turn it off. And, I'd be very involved in my characters. My characters were people, so I would work with them until they were done working. It wasn't only my call.
And they're alive. They're real
they're
people.
alive. They're real
You're
people.
living with them.
And they haunt me.
Oh.
Just like the last song I heard, the last sentence I wrote is that character. It wants to keep writing, and it was.
Let me share something with
Yep.
you, which you probably will think is kind of crazy, but I actually write or start to write poems in my dreams.
Oh, I 100% understand.
And I have a pad next to the bed
I get
and a
up and
little
do it.
pinpoint
Yeah.
flashlight, and I write down ideas at 4 a.m. and then I pick it up as soon as I wake up. I mean, you become obsessive.
I get out of the bed at 3 o'clock in the morning. I sit at the computer and I start writing. And my friends laugh because I also catch up on my email. So they get emails from me at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock in the morning.
Right.
And they go, oh my God, are you up again? And I say, are you? Why are you up?
Right.
But the doorbell doesn't ring. The phone doesn't ring. My wife doesn't make me crazy. She didn't hear that. So the only one is the cat. The cat can't understand what I'm doing. The cat wants me to pet him because I'm up.
But you're working.
So, yeah,
you can't
I say,
do that.
I'm working. Go play with a mouse.
When I was sitting around the studio, it's the first time I've ever been in a video studio before. When I was sitting around before waiting for us to go on, I thought of 3 or 4 different types of poems
Yeah.
that I don't know where I'm going to go with them, but just the idea of the technology and people sitting here and talking in front of the technology, producing something is amazing.
Yeah, it is. Talk to me about Vincent's themes.
I think most people would describe my poetry as being relatively dark. I don't write happy poems. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, for Christmas, my wife challenged me to write a happy poem that we could give to her mother and my mother-in-law, and I failed miserably. I couldn't do it. I write about everyday themes. I try and deal with issues that people encounter in their lives. I write about kids and families, but it's tough. I'm not a happy,
it's
cheery
where you
poet.
come from. Yeah, and a lot of times kids say to me, I've told this story so many times, where the little kid said to me, Mr. Dacquino, how am I supposed to write a good story if my life is boring? And I say, listen, I don't want you to think about what is. I want you to think about the what ifs.
Mm-hmm.
Take your ideas and let them go wherever they want to go. And he got it, and he was able to write a lot freer. And sometimes we have to go inside to find out what's in there and let it out. Now, I know when I do that, I too write themes, sometimes dark, but what I do is I give my mind the freedom to go where it needs to go. I don't want to say writing is the happy place. I want to say it's the private place. And sometimes your private place isn't always a happy place.
Right. But giving yourself that freedom,
Yes.
permission to do that, is an extraordinarily difficult thing to do.
Yes, it is.
And we don't teach people, we don't teach kids when we're teaching them to write. We don't teach them that.
No, that's right.
It's a very structured, rigid approach.
And I work with writers. I've worked with hundreds of writers. And I work with writers every week. And I tell those writers that it's very important that you write for you.
Mhm.
And there's 2 different kinds of writings. There's people who write to write. There's people who write to publish. 2 very different things. If you're writing to write, the most important thing is the process and the product. if you're writing to publish, the most important thing is the product. And you have to decide, are you writing for them or are you writing for you? And sometimes if you're writing for you, you are writing for them. So you have to come to peace with who you are as a writer. Have you done that, Vincent?
I think I've done it over the years. I think I really struggled with that.
It takes time.
When I was younger, I think I was more concerned than I should have been with how the audience was going to receive what I was writing. And as I got older, I don't want to say wiser, because maybe I've not gotten any wiser, but I started writing more for myself as a means of communication.
Yeah.
This is what I
And
want to
clarity.
say. If it works for you and you find it interesting, that's great. But I'm going to talk about what is in Vincent's head, what's in
Right.
Vincent's heart.
That's right.
And I've been much more successful as a writer since I've been able to start doing that.
Yeah.
But it took me a long time. It's very difficult.
People think I'm kidding when they say to me, who is your target audience? And I say, me. And they go, you? And I say,
Well, I used
"Yeah."
to say, I don't care if anybody reads my stuff. I don't care
Of course you do.
if I get published. And, you know, I was lying. I cared a
Yeah.
lot about that.
Sure.
And now I think I'm much more able to understand who is in my audience
Yep.
and how I can communicate with
Yep.
them. I also think as you get older, as you raise a family, there are more things that you can write about emotionally that you truly understand.
Yep.
And I think that makes you more attractive to
And
other
some
people.
things you don't understand.
Yeah.
Sometimes I write for clarity. I want to know how I feel about certain things. And I'm not always clear. This is a crazy world.
Yeah.
I mean, turn on the news. No, don't even do that because that'll really make you nuts. When you look out at those things, and, you know, lately, I think about who was I when I was in high school? Who was that kid? Where is he?
I never wanted, nor did I try, to write any political poems for my whole life until about a year and a half ago.
Oh, yeah.
And now I've started doing it.
Yeah, they're writing themselves.
Yeah, they are. But I have a large folder on my computer, and the title of the folder is Failed Poems. And I put poems in there. What I say to myself is, this poem is won so far. I've been battling, struggling with this poem. And the poem is winning. I can't get it to do what I want it to do.
Yeah.
So I park it in failed
Yeah.
poems, but I go back. And sometimes
Yeah.
I harvest it. I steal some ideas from that one and use it in a new one.
I'm not generally a poet. I'm a novelist. However, I discovered that there is this thing that I worked with called diary poems, and that I could write novels in poetry form. So I've written a couple of them. Emails to a Paranormal is an example where I wrote an entire novel in poem forms. 10 lines, 10 poems to a section. I even forget how many chapters, but the entire book is written in poetry.
It's so interesting that you say that because most of my poems start as prose.
There you go.
When I have an idea and I say, Vincent, I really want to write about this, I will end up writing like a full page of prose. And then I work with that. Those are the basic ingredients
Yeah,
that
like
I'm
a foundation.
using.
Yeah.
And a couple of drafts later, it all of a sudden looks like a poem. And
Well-
that's how I write.
Vincent, give us a taste.
Yep. I have a few poems here that I can read. And sorry if I'm making noise finding them, but
That's all right.
yeah, actually the first one I wanted to read is in here.
While you have that in your hand, hold that up for the camera.
For this,
This is your book.
it's called Live at the Freight House, which is an alcohol emporium in Mahopac.
Yeah. Yes, it
And I
is.
was invited to be part of a reading there, and it was really incredibly interesting. Thank you.
Yep. Okay. So this is from the book.
Yep. And the first poem is called Drinking Alone.
Okay.
And what I wanted to do was just give the audience a sense of what I was trying to achieve in the poem. And this poem, I decided I was going to include Walt Whitman in my poem, as a very famous American writer, obviously. It's called Drinking Alone. I walked into a bar and saw Walt Whitman sitting there staring into his drink. He looked tired and past his prime. His once impressive beard now showed mottled gaps of skin. He started one of those bar conversations about sports and TV. After a few sentences, he said that he had been a poet, but he hadn't written anything recently. I said that I was a poet who was still writing, and he said that he felt sorry for me. Walt said it was different when he was younger. He had freed American poets from their own vestigial limits. Other than editors, poets don't have any natural predators. Their words flood the blank pages. I wanted to write a poem using Walt Whitman as an image.
Yeah.
And talking about the kind of alienation you feel as a writer, because sometimes I feel that the editors out there are doing everything they possibly can not to publish anyone's poems.
Oh, I hear you. I call them gatekeepers.
Yeah.
Yep, they're the gatekeepers that keep wonderful writers out. This poem reminds me of one of the favorite lines from a song. Billy Joel. They're sharing a drink they call loneliness, but it's better than drinking alone. And
I think the idea, the image of drinking alone
Yep.
is something that is great. It's very poetical.
It is. And you know, there were times that I drank alone. No, I didn't drink enough to black out, and it wasn't in high school. But and there were times when I just needed to be alone, and I did sit and stare into my drink,
Yeah.
and just kind of go to a bar just to be alone. And while I was there, I was seeking companionship for my loneliness, you know, and I understand that so completely, that sometimes you need to be alone with your head and
Yeah.
your heart and your mind and your thought and your confusions, because this is a pretty crazy world.
But drinking alone is a good example of how I answered your question before about what are the themes.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
it's a great thing.
I write about everyday
I
kind
get
of
it.
mundane issues
Yeah.
that people are trying
And they're
to
not
deal
so
with.
mundane. Give me another one.
Sure. The next poem I want to read is called An Old Man's Hands. When I was a kid, I was the final kid of the four kids that my parents had, and there was a big age gap between me and my siblings. And I was fascinated by my father's hands, especially when he got older, because you could see
Yeah.
all the veins and other things going on in his hands. And I was fascinated but also put off by it. A couple of years ago I wrote this poem, An Old Man's Hands. My body has a skim coat, newer than a young man's skin. Unlike snake casings, it appeared slowly, not noticed until almost done. Sometimes it feels like a onesie, but it's just me. My hands are starting to look like my father's pair, bulging veins and smaller tributaries, lots of purple, bruising easily. Old men with Coumadin tattoos disturbed me, but now I'm comfortable with my own stigmata. My skin was smooth and tight, now it's dry and loose, with mounds and tendrils. My nose ripens and my gizzard sags, only keeping time with my old man's hands.
Wow, nice. I like that one very much.
Again, mundane things,
Yeah.
daily things.
Yeah.
You know, you live with
Where all
how
of a
your
sudden you
hands look.
realize
Yeah.
you've aged. I tell the story of my father-in-law who was 88 years old, and I was sitting in the living room, and all of a sudden I heard him yell from the bathroom. He said, "What the hell?" And I jumped up and ran in there. I said, "What happened?" He said, Somebody put an old man in the mirror, you know, and it goes that quickly. All of a sudden you notice, and in the hands, that reminds me of another thing. One of my favorite books, A Day No Pigs Would Die, by Robert Newton Peck. And there was a wonderful scene in there where after his father dies, he goes into the shed and he looks at the hoe that his father used all those years. And he takes his hand and he puts it on the worn spot on the hoe, and it fits perfectly. And at that point, he becomes his father.
It's the generational transfer.
It does, and it's just wonderful. And I had that same wonderful warm feeling when I heard your poem.
I think for men especially, there's an existential moment every morning if the man is standing in front of a mirror in the bathroom shaving, because you have 3, 4, 5 minutes where you're just in communication with your own image. And you see what's happened, what you look like. You can't lie to your face.
Those moments of growth. When I was 14 years old, I was doing door-to-door sales to make some extra money. And I knocked on a door, and a kid answered the door, and I was maybe 15, 16. And the kid said, "Mom, there's a man at the door." And I turned around to see who was there.
There's somebody behind me.
You talking to me? And then all of a sudden, you go, "Oh my God, I'm a man," and or how about I'm an old man? Or people say, "Grandpa, come here a minute," and they go, "Me?" And it's that revelation, and that's what you write about, revelations.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful thing. And to me, poetry is therapy, poet therapy. And it's a wonderful opportunity to get into yourself. Who are you? Why are you here? And what did you just see? What does that mean? And I love poetry for that reason, because it's a wonderful opportunity to communicate with a person you've known for many years and yet don't completely know.
And I think as you age, as you get older and you understand more things, one of the insights you get is you realize you understand a lot less.
Yeah.
When I was
right.
18
That's
or in my early 20s, I thought I had the answers for
That's right.
everything. And now, when I'm shaving, looking at my face in the mirror, I realize that there are some things I'm absolutely certain about that I know, but most things are gray now.
I taught school for 35 years.
Wow.
The one most important thing I learned is that teachers are not there to teach answers. They're there to teach questions. If you can create questions in a child's mind and let him or her find his or her own answers, then you've done a good teaching job. Your answers are not necessarily theirs.
And they may not be the right answer 10 years
right.
or 20 years later on.
Well, here's some bad news. We're flying, man. You got enough time for your favorite poem.
Oh, wow. I was worried I wouldn't have enough stuff.
No, I knew that.
Let's go to something with big type so I can see.
Yeah, I hear you.
This poem is called Doorman. I spent the portion of one summer when I was in college. My summer job was being a doorman in a fancy high-rise in Greenwich Village. 175 West 12th Street's lobby always smelled as if it had just been mopped. The fabric of my uniform was coarse gray wool with faded ornamental white piping on the collar and near my wrists. The gloves slid nicely under my cuffs when I pushed the door open as they came and went. Some of them huddled under the canopy until I corralled their cab. People generally thanked you with $1 without seeing my face.
Wow. Wow, I like that last line. Thank me with dollars without seeing my face. What does that mean to you?
It was a kind of stark taste of alienation.
Yeah.
I was probably 19 at that point, and I had grown up in an upper middle class family, and I went to NYU, and I'd never had a job where I was a doorman, where I essentially
You're
was
part of their lives and no part at all.
I was part of the door.
That's right. That's exactly right.
I was the door
You
opener
were
and
the door
closer.
opener, and they came and went
Yeah.
through the door and never even bothered to look at it.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's pretty scary. So, where do you go from here, Vincent?
Keep on writing. I'm in the process right now of submitting a manuscript of 24 poems to a series of publishers, and hopefully I'll get one of them interested in that. And I'd like to have a full-length hardcover collection. And I'm starting to go back to writing prose as well. I've written a bunch of prose poems, and I'm going to restart a blog that I haven't focused on in a couple of years, because there's just too many things going on now in what I guess we think of as the public sphere
Yeah.
that I have ideas about, and they're things I want to say, and some of them really don't work in poetry.
I remember years ago, I spoke with an agent about poetry. And I said, maybe someday I'll try to write a book of poems. He said, okay, just don't try to sell them, because
no money.
nobody's buying them.
Right.
He said, try to think of the last time you bought a book of poems. And I said, well, I didn't actually buy it. He said, yeah, you and everybody else. He said, they're a hard sell, but that doesn't mean they're not a valuable resource. They are, both to the poet and to the reader.
Believe
poetry.
me, I know that. There are times when I feel like being able to write a poem has saved my life at various junctures.
Well, you heard it here. Poetry is not easy, but it's important. And it's something that you need to do. You think you're a poet? Go write a poem. Don't talk about it, because poets write, talkers talk. Go write a poem. And in the meantime, Vincent.
Thanks, Vinny.
Thank you, buddy. Good to have you here.
It's my pleasure.
Keep writing and keep going to places like the Freight House to read your work.
I love reading my work.
Me too. So that's where we'll meet.
Have a great day.
You too. Have a good one. Thank you for tuning in. Tune in again. We'll always have some very interesting writers here for you. In the meantime, thank you for being one-on-one with Vincent Bell.